Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Crowd Chatter Podcast. And I'm sure you guys have been waiting for this category. This is the work to do category. This is where we talk about the teams that are kind of sitting right on the bubble and are possibly in some trouble of getting into the tournament. So let's get into this video as we got a lot to discuss and we got a lot of teams that we need to go through. So, starting off this video, I will start with the ACC. And I'll start with a team that has played itself into the tournament past few weeks, and that is the Pitt Panthers. This is an older logo. But the Pitt Panthers have played pretty well since getting into the ACC. They're top of the conference. Only issue for the Pitt Panthers is they have a lot of bad losses. Losing by 25 to West Virginia, losing by 31 to Michigan, losing, I think, another game pretty bad to somebody else. They did beat Northwestern on the road by 29, so that can offset some of those really bad losses. And they obviously have a really good conference record. They have a season sweep over North Carolina. So the Pitt Panthers have done a pretty good job so far. Like I said, polarizing resume, but with the amount of wins that they're starting to pile up, I think they're continuing to play themselves further and further into the tournament. But that leads me to my next team. As I said, they had a season sweep over North Carolina. Well, speaking of, here they are. North Carolina Tar Heels. I put them behind the Pitt Panthers. North Carolina was the preseason #1 team this year. And by the fact that you're finding them here in the work to do category, I think they're on the right side of the bubble. I think they'd be in the tournament at this point, but they still need work. They don't really have a resume defining win. Obviously, that season sweep against Pitt doesn't look the greatest. They just lost their big game to Duke. They need big wins and they need them now, and they have not gotten it yet. The record is still fine. They're still 15-8, which is a decent record. I think that still is pretty good, and it would still get them in the tournament at this point. But they don't really have, I don't think, much margin for error. You lose a bad game in the ACC, especially. It's tough for some of these teams because if you take a loss to one of the bottom feeders of the conference, you're going to be in serious trouble. But North Carolina hasn't been great lately. They have some work to do. We'll see if they can get some wins going. Weird team. This is another team, just like the Pitt Panthers. This team has played its way into tournament conversation. That's Virginia Tech, even though half the logo's gone. But Virginia Tech had a really rough start to the ACC. They could not buy a win. They could not buy a win early on. They did beat North Carolina in their first ACC game, which is like early December thing that the Big Ten kind of does. But they did get a win against North Carolina there. But then they really just could not buy themselves anything else. And they were constantly losing games. They do have a non conference win against Oklahoma State, as well as a non conference win against Penn State, both of which are decent teams. And spoiler alert, you'll see them soon. But Virginia Tech, then they would lose, five, I think six, seven straight in the ACC. They'd lose their next seven after getting North Carolina. They'd win three non-conference games, and then would start with losing on the road to Boston College, which is a really bad loss, mind you. But then they were able to knock off Duke. Now they just got to win against Virginia. But their conference record is still very poor, and that still needs a lot of work. And so they really need to start getting some. They have three straight games against bottom feeders of the conference, so they can win all three of those. Virginia Tech is going to be in a much better position because they'll put their conference record at 7-8, which is a lot better looking than 4-8. Of course, they're all going to be against bad teams, but when you get your non-conference record to almost 500, you're going to look a lot better no matter what. So VT really needs some more wins in the conference, and it needs to start there. And then the last team is just barely clinging on to work clinging on the tournament life is Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons had a decent start to the season, and as they have a road win against Wisconsin, which is a really good win, as the Wisconsin Badgers are a pretty are actually a pretty decent team. So winning on the road in Madison is a huge win for them. They did get blown out by Rutgers, but they did beat Duke at home, which Duke is a pretty good team. They also beat Clemson at home, which is another big win, and that really was all they had. They lost their last four until losing to or until beating Notre Dame. So they were at 14 and I think 5 after they beat 14 and 5 after they beat Clemson. Then they lose four straight. They're now at 15 and 9. Their conference record is 7 and 8. So I mean they have some decent wins. But they got a big game Tuesday against North Carolina. They also got Miami and NC State coming up, which are both big games. And that's really their last chances for big wins. They might need to win all of those. But Wake Forest has got a decent record. They have something to work with, but they need another big win. They can't afford to really. I think at most they can afford to lose one, but they'd probably need all three. But that's it for Wake Forest. So we go to the next conference, which of course is the Big 12. And pretty much every team in this conference is in contention except for maybe Texas Tech. I'm not going to put them on here because unfortunately their conference record is absolutely brutal and they don't really have a big win. So I think Texas Tech is probably the only team you're not going to find in here. So yeah, spoiler alert, everybody else you're going to find. But the best team in the work to do category is Oklahoma State. The Cowboys have really played themselves into the tournament conversation as of late because they really did not look all that impressive for a while, and nobody really talked about them because well there wasn't really much to talk about for them. But they've won quite a few games as of late and have drastically improved their conference record. As they now have wins over Iowa State, a season sweep over Duke, a win at home, or not Duke, over Oklahoma. They had a season sweep over Duke, even though they're not in their conference. Sorry. But season sweep over Oklahoma, beat TCU at home. Of course, like I said, they beat Iowa State at home. They also beat West Virginia, which should offset that ugly Southern Illinois loss, which is obviously not good. They also lost to UCF, UConn, and Virginia Tech in the non-conference. So they have some good conference wins. They're now at 500 and was a very difficult Big 12. So really, if you have any kind of a conference record like that, you're gonna get yourself tournament recognition. And 500 in the Big 12 is very good. So Oklahoma State playing themselves into the tournament, like kind of like Pitt and Virginia Tech. Oklahoma State has put themselves in a decent position now and actual consideration. So very very well done by them. We were talking about West Virginia earlier, so let's go and put the Mountaineers in this conversation. West Virginia, they're not 500 in the Big 12, unlike Oklahoma State. They're not. Their conference record is 3-7. However, big difference for West Virginia is they have a non-conference win at home over Auburn, who is a pretty good team. They also beat TCU at home. They just blew out Oklahoma pretty badly. um, and they do have a couple decent wins. As speaking of the Pitt Panthers, actually, they blew them out on the road by 25, and were able to beat Florida by 29, who's another tournament type team. So West Virginia has some nice wins. They're right on top. They're like squarely on the bubble, I'd say right now. But the Mountaineers are in an okay position. They obviously are definitely a team with work to do, but definitely something to work with. They at least have some nice wins, and maybe they can take advantage of them. As for Oklahoma, as they are the last team to come out of the Big 12, Oklahoma's even worse than West Virginia in the conference, as they are 2-8. And their only two wins at this point in the conference are against Texas Tech on the road, and I'm trying to find where the other one is. They have and West Virginia at home. Those are only West Virginia at home, and then Texas Tech on the road. Those are their only wins in the conference. Uh, and for non-conference games, they blew out Alabama at home, which is an amazing win. They ended up also beating Florida in a neutral site game. They beat Seton Hall, and then that's really as far as that goes. They lost Sam Houston, which is not good. Losing to Villanova, which is not good. Losing to Arkansas, which is not great. So Oklahoma, a bit of a polarizing resume, but that Alabama win is really the only thing that's keeping them alive. But they got a motherload of enormous games coming up, going to Baylor, home to Kansas, and home to Kansas State. I think. Oh, and on the road against Texas. Let's not forget that one. So, like I said, they have a crud ton of big games coming up. And if they can win a good amount of those, they probably need to win at least three, but especially if they can get all four. But Oklahoma needs to win some of those games. If they don't, they're done. I think their tournament chances, just getting a at-large bid, I think are over if they can't win some of those games. But Oklahoma uh, still has a chance. Still has a chance. And then we got the Big East, and I know that this team just got ranked this week, but I do not consider Creighton a should be in team, let alone a lock. I think they still got work to do. They have a couple, honestly, not great losses. I know they're ranked 23rd, but they're 15-8. Their Big East record is actually pretty good, but as I said, they got work to do, and they need to win quite a few games. Well, I don't know about quite a few games, but they need some wins. Bottom line, I think they need some wins to really feel comfortable about any kind of a resume, any kind of sure thing for the NCAA tournament. But Creighton does have some good wins in the conference now, as they've beaten Xavier. I don't think they've beaten Marquette, but they got some decent wins, and so they are pushing envelope further and further now. And the more wins that they'll collect, the more comfortable I think I would feel with Creighton being a tournament team. But I think 23rd for them at 15-8 is kind of absurd. And then Seton Hall is the other team that I have coming out of the Big East. That's currently a work to do team. They're 15-9, 8-5 in the conference. They have a couple decent wins. They have some wins, and they have some not great losses. They've lost to Iowa at home, but they did beat Memphis on a neutral floor, which is a pretty good win. Lost to Oklahoma, lost to Siena, which is not good. But they beat Rutgers on the road, which is a huge win for them. They did unfortunately take a pretty bad tumble at Kansas. That is Kansas, but you still don't want to get blown out, and they got blown out. They lost to Providence, Xavier, and Marquette, which are all, of course, the biggest team, and Creighton, which are all the biggest teams coming out of course, the conference. Took another tumble to Marquette. Ended up beating UConn, which is a nice win for them. So they don't really have a lot of great wins. They've come short in a lot of big games, and they'll have Creighton coming up next. So that'll be a big game for them. They also have UConn coming up again as well, along with Xavier and Providence. So they still have plenty of opportunities to improve their resume, but they need to win quite a few of those to keep their tournament chances alive. So now we go to the Big Ten. Big Ten has a lot of teams that have work to do, and let's just start with. We're gonna start with the Spartans. Let's start with Michigan State. Michigan State has a decent conference record. They are 500 in the conference, 14-9. They had a very, very difficult non-conference schedule, which started with losing to Gonzaga in a close one, beat Kentucky in a close one, although the Wildcats are not really a great team right now, as they're barely clinging on tournament life themselves. Villanova is not a good team. It looked like that'd be a good team that they would play, but Nova did not end up being very good. They ended up losing to Bama. They beat Oregon, who's not very good. They beat Portland, who's not very good. They got blown out by Notre Dame. It looked like it'd be a really hard schedule, but for Michigan State in November. But a lot of these teams have really fallen, have really fallen off a cliff quite a bit since then. But losing to Notre Dame on the road pretty bad is not good. Lost at home Northwestern, who's a decent team. But really, their big conference, their big wins, really their only good non-conference win is Kentucky. They beat Penn State on the road, which is a decent win. They beat Wisconsin on the road, beat the Wolverines, which might mean something. They beat Rutgers at home, which is big. They beat Iowa at home, which is nice. And then that's really as far as their wins go. They've really either lost every other game or the wins that they did get are just not really all that impressive. So Michigan State definitely could use a resume boost with a nice win or two. They do have Maryland coming up, which at home, which is I think a must win for them. You can't lose that game. Then you got three straight games of where you can't lose any of those, meaning Ohio State, Minnesota, and on the road against Michigan. Then you'll finally get Indiana, a road game against Iowa, and then another game against Ohio State. So they really don't have any games of where they can boost their resume except for Indiana and Iowa, and then Maryland. So they really pretty much have to win every other game that they have on their schedule except for maybe three. But Michigan State, I don't think they really have much room for error. They take many more losses, they're gonna be in some trouble. And so the next team we have for in the work to do category for the Big Ten is an odd one, not one I think anybody would expect considering how bad they've been for the past few years, and that's Northwestern. The Wildcats weirdly actually have a decent record at 16-7 and then 7-5 in the Big Ten. I know that's hard to believe, but they're actually a decent team. As they fell short to Auburn by one, which was unfortunate. Obviously, getting blown out at home by Pitt is really bad. But they beat Michigan State on the road. They beat Illinois. They beat Indiana on the road. They beat Wisconsin, I think twice. I think they have a season sweep over Wisconsin, and I believe that's as far as their resume goes. But a season sweep over Wisconsin, wins over Illinois at home, and Indiana on the road, mind you, and then a road win against Michigan State. So Northwestern's got a lot of nice wins in the conference. Of course, a season sweep to Michigan is not ideal, but a lot of nice non-conference or a lot of conference wins around that will certainly help them. Nothing in the non-conference, but their conference wins are what are keeping them in tournament conversation. Northwestern's got a pretty solid resume of conference wins, and so that will certainly help them out in the future. And the next team that we have coming, and we got a lot more teams still out of the Big Ten here. Next, we have Maryland. The Terrapins had a really, really nice start to the season, and it just kept getting worse after that start. They had I believe they had like an 8-0, 9-0 start. I think they had an 8-0 start to the season, of where they got a win over Miami, Florida, as well as St. Louis. St. Louis is okay. And also Illinois, but then they would take some bad tumbles that kind of set them back a bit. They would lose on the road to Wisconsin in a defensive struggle. They would lose another defensive struggle to Tennessee, which is obviously a good team, but they had multiple opportunities to win that game, and then got blown out at home by UCLA, which again is a really good team, but it just doesn't look pretty on the resume. Especially getting blown out on your own home turf by 27. Then lost on the road to Michigan by 35. So you can tell, and then lost to Rutgers. It kept getting worse. But then would finally get a win against Ohio State. Would get Michigan back at home. Then would beat Wisconsin. Get a win just recently over Indiana. Blew out Minnesota, which everybody's supposed to. So Maryland's been finally, after those really bad losses, have started to right the ship and have started to get some nice wins back on the resume. That non-conference win over Miami, Florida will definitely help them. Also, being Illinois will help them. Getting Wisconsin at home will help them. Being Indiana at home will help them. So they got a lot of wins now that are starting to right the ship. And like I said, the more they win, the more it'll continue to look better for them. And up to the next team from the Big Ten, and that is Wisconsin. The Badgers are another team that this team's a little bit different. The Badgers' not conference record is below 500. They are 5-7 in the conference. In the non-conference, they do have a win over USC, which is a pretty good, which is a solid win. USC is a decent team. Fell short to Kansas. That was a huge missed opportunity for them. Lost at home to Wake Forest, but they beat Marquette, and that is a very good win. They beat Iowa on the road, which is another very good win. Beating Maryland is a pretty good win at home as well. So you can already see they have a lot of nice wins, beating USC and Marquette in the non-conference. And in the conference, as I already said, Maryland and Iowa. And they would also later collect wins against Penn State. And, well, actually, it doesn't just against Penn State. I don't really see anybody else that they beat on here. Yeah, no. But they beat Penn State. And they also beat Ohio State recently. But Wisconsin's got some decent wins. Obviously, lately it has not gone well for them as they have continued to lose and lose, as it's been kind of rough here in January and the start of February. But the early season wins are certainly keeping them in the conversation. They still need some more wins to kind of help them out as their decline here has not helped them at all. But Wisconsin, decent resume. I'd say they're probably on the wrong side of the bubble right now, but some more wins will certainly help them. And they have two games against Michigan still, as well as a game against Rutgers, Penn State, Iowa. And they also still have another chance against Purdue at home. So that is a really big game for Wisconsin. Uh, but bottom line, they got plenty of chances to boost the resume much more. But speaking of Penn State, that's the next team. And yeah, go figure. Penn State is in this conversation. I know probably none of you expected that one. But Penn State finds themselves in tournament contention very strangely. This is a team that loves to shoot threes. Sometimes does it well, sometimes doesn't. Just depends on how they're playing that given day. But the Penn State Nittany Lions early in the season took a 2-point loss to Virginia Tech. Of course, they ended up being pretty good so far. Also took a unfortunate double overtime loss to Clemson, of which also they have played very well since then. So that's another unfortunate missed opportunity. But then they finally got their first, resume win with a big win on the road against Illinois by 15, which does look pretty darn good at this point. They also beat Iowa at home. They also beat Indiana at home. Obviously, they blew out the Wolverines at home, which was really frustrating when they started hitting logo threes. But Penn State has got some nice wins. Obviously, they got blown out by Purdue. They just took a loss in Nebraska yesterday, so that really hurts the resume. But they got Wisconsin, Maryland, they got Wisconsin, Maryland, Illinois all coming up, as well as Rutgers and Maryland again, as well as Northwestern. So all kinds of opportunities for Penn State to still make it known in to make their still many opportunities. Why am I fumbling around so much here? Still many of opportunities for Penn State to get a big win and get themselves more on the map and get themselves on the right side of the bubble, get some nice wins, and get everything jump started once again. And this is definitely, I know, not going to be by popular belief, and you can consider this a homer pick, but I am putting, yes, I know, this is a homer pick, okay? But let me be, let me be. Michigan Wolverines, I'm going to put them in the next spot here. I don't know if they're necessarily a bubble team. They really aren't. Well, just for the sake of having fun, let's just talk about it. They have a 31-point win against the Pitt Panthers, who obviously you can see them up here. They on ESPN are listed as like an 8-9 seed, so that 31-point win continues to look better and better. Um, and other than that, they don't really have another big non-conference win, but they beat Maryland at home by 35. They beat Penn State by 10 at home. They also have a season sweep over Northwestern. They just beat Ohio State. And really, that's as far as the resume goes for the Wolverines. They had a very close game against Purdue, but just came up short at home. That was a huge missed opportunity for the Wolverines. And they've also had two huge missed opportunities against Iowa and Maryland on the road, both of games of which they fell just short in. We weren't going to beat Penn State whether we wanted to or not. And in the non-conference, you got ugly losses against Arizona State by 25, and also losing to Central Michigan is really bad. But you've also lost to North Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia, all by a very close margin. So Michigan definitely needs a lot more, quality wins, big wins to offset the not so great losses, especially like 25 to Arizona State, and losing to Central at home is really bad. And then getting blown out by 22 on the road by Penn State also doesn't look good. So Michigan needs some more, just quality wins to offset stuff. And they got Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Rutgers, another game against Wisconsin, Indiana twice, and Illinois. They got Wisconsin and Indiana both twice. They got Sparty. They got Rutgers. They got Illinois. They have multiple opportunities to really improve the resume and really get things going. So they definitely still have a pretty good chance. If they get some more big wins, that they should definitely be considered. But at this point, I don't really think there's much to be talked about, but they do have a chance. And I would have put Ohio State right behind them, but since their conference record is 3-9, they're below 500, and they just have looked awful. I won't put Ohio State in here. I would have, but they keep losing, and it keeps looking worse and worse for them. So I will leave out Ohio State. And we go to now the Pac 12. And there's really only one team out of the Pac 12 outside UCLA and Arizona has a chance of making the tournament. And, well, take a wild guess who it is. Yep, you guessed it, USC. The Trojans are really the only other good team in that entire conference when it comes to basketball. But USC has got a decent team. They have a good record at 17-6. Their conference record is 9-3. They don't really have a bad loss in the Pac-12 either. Their early loss to Florida Gulf Coast is bad. Really losing to Tennessee, they fell short in that one. They beat BYU, which is not anything special. Lost to Wisconsin, of course. They beat Auburn in the non-conference, which is a nice win for them. They beat Colorado State. Then you go to the conference. They did lose to Arizona, but they beat UCLA at home, and that is a huge win for USC. For USC. Now they do have to go pretty much through the entire month of February without losing because none of these teams are any good. But USC has got a good record, a good conference record with their only losses. They have one bad loss at Washington State, but their other two losses are UCLA and Arizona, and that's it. And they've beaten Arizona State on the road, which was a borderline NCAA tournament hopeful for a while. But of course, the more losses that they keep taking, the more strugglesome it's getting for Arizona State. So USC though, decent resume. As I said, I would have put Arizona State in here, but their conference record keeps getting worse, and they keep taking bad losses to bad Pac-12 teams. And the more losses they take, the less and less likely their tournament chances become. And so now we go to the SEC. So going to the SEC, we'll start with the team that is actually having an outstanding conference record and is tied with Tennessee for second in the conference, and that is Texas A&M. The Aggies don't really have a lot of great wins, but since they have such a great conference record, that's why they find themselves in this position. Because earlier in the season, they lost to both Murray State and Colorado, neither of which are good teams. They did, and they also lost to Boise State. They also lost to Memphis and to Wofford. So they don't have a single good non-conference win, and they also have three bad losses. So that really hurts them. But then you go into the conference, they beat Florida, they beat Missouri, they beat Florida again, they beat Auburn, they beat Georgia. They have a couple good conference wins. Now their only two losses in the conference come to Arkansas and Kentucky on the road. Both road games, they've won all their home games. So if you're Texas A&M and you got Auburn coming up again on Tuesday, you can finish that season sweep. So really, A&M, the only reason they're here is because of their not because of their non-conference, because of their conference record, because of how good it is. Being 8-2 in the SEC is pretty darn impressive. But they still need a lot more good wins to get themselves into the tournament. But 8-2 in the conference is pretty hard to do, so that's why A&M finds themselves here. Next up is the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky is a team that is definitely looking to push themselves into the tournament. As an early loss, they had an early loss to Michigan State. They lost to Gonzaga early on. They did beat Michigan, but that's not really saying much at this point. They lost to UCLA and Missouri. They beat LSU, but LSU has continued to struggle in the conference and really just continues to get worse. They lost to Bama and they lost at home to South Carolina, which is really, really bad. Until they finally got a good win, and they beat Tennessee on the road, and that is very hard to do. They got a huge win there. And they also beat Texas A&M at home. They lost to Kansas, but they did beat Florida recently. So really, that Tennessee win on the road is the only thing keeping Kentucky alive in tournament conversation. If it wasn't for that win, I don't think they're even being considered for the tournament right now. But because of that win, Kentucky finds themselves here. And if they can get some more wins in the conference, that would be huge for them. We'll see if they're really able to do that. But as of right now, they're a work to do team, and they still need a lot more wins. Next in the SEC is Arkansas. The Razorbacks were a well hyped team to begin the season, and really everybody thought this team would be very good. and it was looking early like they just might be a pretty good team. But due to some injuries that knocked some guys out, their season has really gone cold. They do have early on. They did get a win on the. They did get a road against. They did get a win, not road. They got a win against San Diego State. They did beat Oklahoma. And then we get to the conference where they did beat Missouri, which is a big win for them. They did also lose to Missouri. They lost to Vandy. They lost to Baylor, but they did beat Texas A&M. So they have two good wins thus far. As they won at home against Missouri and they won at home against Texas A&M. Really, other than that, there's not a good conference win for them so far. But of course, due to injuries, they have really just it has really hurt them. They've lost two of their best shooters, and so it's really or their two best shooters, and it's really obviously affected how good they actually can be. But they are still just 16-7, so their record is not too bad, and I'd still give them a chance. Next team coming out of the SEC we have is Mississippi State. Mississippi State's like kind of like other teams where they have a really good resume, but their conference record is so putrid. What was it? West Virginia, and kind of like Oklahoma too. But Mississippi State, their conference record is not very good, as they are 3-7 in the SEC. But their non-conference is actually pretty darn good, as they have a win against Marquette, which is obviously fantastic. Win over Utah, which is at least okay. They lose to Drake, which is not good. But then you get into the conference where they didn't have a lot of great wins, but they beat TCU in a non-conference game to finally get back under their feet, and then just recently beat Missouri in the conference. So you look at that, you just kind of go over it. They beat Marquette. They beat TCU. They lost a lot of games in the conference in there, and have won their last two SEC games. The last one being Missouri. So and they got some borderline tournament teams coming up. They got LSU, and then both Arkansas and Kentucky, Ole Miss. So this is a huge stretch for Mississippi State to build up some wins and get that conference record to a respectable margin, which would definitely put them right in the middle of tournament conversation. I still think with their non-conference wins that they got a decent case, but because of that really awful January stretch where they lost to team they lost to teams like Georgia, which Georgia's not a terrible team. They actually have a decent record, but they're not really in the tournament conversation. Uh, you need to kind of offset those kinds of losses, and so when they're able to do that, they'll be in a much better spot. And then the last team coming out of the SEC is Florida. The Gators recently have pushed the envelope to kind of get themselves in this conversation with a huge win at home against Tennessee. Because really, before that, Florida did not have much. They had lost to Xavier. FAU is a decent team. I think oh no, they're in this category. Yeah, they are in this category. But they lost at home to FAU, who has had actually a really good season. So, as much as you would think, wow, that's a really bad loss, that actually is not terrible, believe it or not. And they already mentioned that they lost to Xavier. They beat Oregon State and then got blown out by West Virginia. Oregon State's bad. Lost to UConn, lost to Oklahoma, lost to Auburn. And then you get to the conference of where they did get a win over Missouri, which is nice for them. But really, other than that, they had nothing. And then when they got that win over Tennessee, that was enormous for the Gators. And then they, of course, lost on the road to Kentucky. But come Wednesday, they'll have another huge game as they go to Tuscaloosa to take on Bama. And that's another big game for them. So really, plenty of opportunities for the Florida Gators so big opportunity for the Gators to get their resume even better. They also got a home game against Kentucky coming soon. They got a road game against Arkansas, and then that's really as far as that goes. The rest of these teams are not very good, and they're all games they can't lose. So, really, three more opportunities for Florida to get big wins. The rest all are must wins. You can't really lose in the rest of these games. And really, they're not games they should lose either. But if Florida can get, a win over Kentucky at home, a win over Arkansas, or get that enormous win, get like another one, they beat Tennessee, but say they get that big win on the road against Bama, that would be huge. But they need to win one of those, at least one. If they beat Kentucky and Arkansas, that would be probably their best case scenario because likelihood they're not beating Bama. So if they can beat these two with Kentucky at home and Arkansas on the road, that'd be huge for the Gators, and I think that's their best shot. And that would definitely put them in a good spot. So I think that's Florida's best opportunity, and yeah, but they got a decent chance. I'd say they're in a pretty good position. They're in an okay position, and we'll see how far that goes. So now we go to just the other conferences, other teams that are not in, they're not within the Power Five here, or I guess Power Six because the Big East. They're fighting for tournament chances, and we start with the Memphis Tigers. Coming out of the American Conference, Memphis has got a decent team. They have a decent record. They have a good conference record. They have a season sweep coming out they got swept by Tulane, which is not ideal, but they have some non-conference wins. As they have they have a non-conference win, I should say, as they beat Auburn, or actually two. They beat Auburn, and then they beat Texas A&M, which are both nice wins. Ole Miss doesn't matter. They fell short just barely to Alabama, so that definitely hurts. But it's Bama, so it's just a missed opportunity at this point. And Memphis in the conference only has lost 3 games, that being 2 to Tulane and 1 to UCF. They've beaten everybody else, and they have yet to play Houston, which obviously is the best team in that entire conference, and a win over them just would be enormous for them. So those 2 games loom large for the Tigers. Other than that, really for the American, I have nobody. But I do have a team coming. I do have another team that I wanted to discuss, and these two are interesting entries due to the fact that both of them are having weirdly good seasons, and that's now. Next, we have Florida Atlantic, and I know for a team that's as small as them, it's kind of weird to put them in this category, but here they are. This is a 12 and or I'm sorry, not 12, 22 and 2 team. With their only 2 losses coming to Ole Miss on the road, which obviously isn't good, and then just recently they took a loss to UAB on the road. So I mean, in all likelihood, the CUSA is probably going to be a one bid conference, but FAU continues to keep winning. And say they go through the rest of the year with only 2 losses, I could see them getting a non-conference or an at-large bid. Uh, come tournament time. You fall just short in the tournament, and somebody else wins it from the CUSA. FAU, if they build up enough wins before then, could definitely find themselves just in by default. And same goes for this other team, and that is Charleston. And this team actually has a little bit of some non-conference wins. Like FAU, they had one win really against Florida, and really just had nothing else in the non-conference. They had pretty much lost to, or no, they didn't lose to anybody. Yes, they didn't play anybody else and beat everybody else. And their lone good win was Florida. But Charleston actually has a couple decent wins. Davidson is not a great team, so that doesn't really do anything for Charleston. But they beat Virginia Tech. They fell short to North Carolina. Oh, they only have to play Virginia Tech. I thought they played Penn State too. Well, they played Colorado State. No. Well, Charleston has one good win against Virginia Tech, who is up here, of course, which is a big win for them. And they won that miniature tournament. They beat Colorado State in it too, and they're not playing well. But they beat Virginia Tech, which is a good win for Charleston. They just took two losses recently as they uh, lost to Hofstra and then they lost to Drexel. They did just beat Delaware, and really Charleston's the same thing as FAU. If they get some wins in a row here, if they build up a couple good wins all in a row and get themselves some big wins, just they keep winning games and they keep dominating their conferences, I could definitely see them play their way right into tournament right into a you know uh, I can't spit it out. At large bid into the tournament. There we go. So now we go to the Mountain West for the final three teams. Yeah, spoiler alert, there's only three more teams left. And the first one is going to be Nevada. Nevada's a decent team. They have a couple decent wins. We've seen Nevada in the tournament before. But Nevada, as far as non-conference goes, they did beat Tulane, fell just short to Kansas State. That was a huge missed opportunity, and once you look back at now. Lost at Loyola Marymount on the road, and also lost to Oregon, which neither of those are not good looks. But they beat Boise State, they beat Utah State, they beat New Mexico, they beat San Diego State, which are all good teams in the Mountain West, and their Mountain West record is 8-3, and their overall record is 18-6. So I think Nevada still could use some bigger wins because they don't really have anything in the non-conference, and they've kind of just beaten the other teams in the Mountain West. But Nevada got a decent team, and those are all nice wins for them, and that will definitely help them. Next, we have coming also from the Mountain West, if I can find them on here. There they are. Is Utah State. Utah State was another team. There were three teams that came out of the Mountain West that all at one point were undefeated. And that was New Mexico, Utah State, and UNLV. They were all undefeated at one point, all playing pretty darn well. Of course, UNLV has fallen off a cliff since then. New Mexico has mostly kept it up, and Utah State has sort of kept it up since then. But the Utah State Aggies, let's get into them. Early on, they beat Santa Clara, who is a decent team. They beat San Francisco, who is a decent team. They did lose to SMU though, which was a really bad loss. SMU is actually really bad. And then in the conference itself, they beat New Mexico, and that's really about it. So Utah State doesn't really have any big wins as of right now. But because of their conference record, because of their overall record, I think Utah State has a decent chance. I put them behind Nevada because they don't have nearly as good of a resume. But Utah State definitely has got shot, and we'll see if they can boost the resume some more and do even better. But Boise State is also another team coming out of the Mountain West I'm putting here, and I meant to Utah State. Boise State early on lost a couple bad games. They lost to South Dakota State, which is awful. They lost to Charlotte, which is also really bad. But Boise State has also beaten Texas A&M, which is a big win for them. They beat St. Louis, which is a decent team. They did lose to Santa Clara though, which is not good. But in the conference, they beat Utah State. They fell short to New Mexico. Um, and then they also got blown out by San Diego State. Boise State is another team that has a solid record, but still overall record too. The conference record, overall record, both really good. They beat Nevada, but uh, Boise State's another team that could use another good win or two in the conference to really boost their resume. As Boise State, they have some good wins, but they could use more in the conference. But overall, they still have a pretty good record, which is really keeping them alive right now. So that is it for the work to do category. Once again, I hope you guys enjoyed it. And that is it for this video. Go watch all of them, as all of the videos should be out now, as I just finished recording all of them. As I also said, there's a lot of the recording I'll have to do for different stuff, but that's it for this one. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and until next time, adios everyone.